Hello and welcome to John and James Live. Today we have Emma Lloyd and Carolyn Roodhouse. Did I pronounce that right, Carolyn? No, I didn't. Is it Rude?
Caroline.
Caroline. Okay, sorry. It's a good
Okay.
start. But Caroline, I've found you on LinkedIn a while back, and it was about, just to set the scene, about your husband, Steve, and he tragically passed away from suicide in 2018. That's right, isn't it, Caroline?
Yes.
So I was watching your post, and I said to James, we've got to have Caroline on because I bought your book about the story, and it's the first book I've ever read cover to cover in one sitting. It just compelled me. Everything about the book, the story, I could resonate. Being a man with daughters, having a wife, and being in Steve's potential mind. And I thought it's such an important conversation to have, like we were just speaking off screen. So I just thank you for coming in to bring awareness to this situation first of all. And how are you today?
I'm all right, thank you. When the sun's shining, it's much easier to be cheerful, isn't it? And lots going on at the moment with me, with the girls. But yeah, generally today, I always ask my children how many are you out of 100, just so I can gauge where they are mood wise. And I'd say today I was probably a 82, which isn't too bad.
That's a good way to do it.
What are you guys?
Emma, where are you? Where are you today, Emma?
I'm a little bit lower today. There's a few things happening in the background as well, so I'm probably a bit lower than I normally would. Delighted to be here today, but yeah, I think it's moods can fluctuate so rapidly, can't they?
Yeah, 100%. And for you guys, you're best friends, right? So how did you guys meet? Where did you guys meet? How do you know each other?
You can do that one, Emma.
Well, it was about 500 years ago. That's what Caroline says that to me regularly, because I'm obviously considerably older than her.
Yes, older than me.
She regularly reminds me of as well. So we worked in a bank together, and then started to, we found that actually we had some common interests and started to sort of gravitate away from some of the other social things that were going on, because we were little hermits in our own little rights. And we used to love to go off and have sort of fine wine and fine food. And well, I say fine wine and fine food, it was normally in Wetherspoons, but we progressed.
Cafe Uno, wasn't it?
As we grew up and progressed. So yeah, we met through work. And then godmother to Caroline's children as well now. So then sort of that friendship continued.
And you live quite close to each other?
Yeah, not too bad, about half an hour away.
I think you're pleased that it's about half an hour away.
Oh my gosh. I think even the virtual demands are pretty high. So yeah, 30 minutes is good.
Yeah.
So what do you think bonded you both so kind of... well, particularly at that stage, do you think you sort of saw like a commonality in each other? There was something you saw in each other that made you feel like that was your sort of your kindred spirit in some way, or was it just, or am I reading too much into it?
No, I think you're absolutely right. There was because we were significantly younger back in those days, and there was quite a social life around everybody that worked at the bank. People were going out like in the evenings, weekends. Lots of drinking, lots of girly trips away. And I think both Emma and I would say, yeah, we feel like we should get involved. And eventually we both sort of admitted to each other, I don't really enjoy these going out and getting pissed all night. I'd rather just go out for lunch and then go home and go to bed. And Emma was the same. And we kind of bonded over that, much more home kind of people, similar interests, both really interested in like human behavior and stuff like that, and yeah, just similar characters. And I think that's what's brought us together over time, and the same sense of humor as well, I think.
I was about to say shared sense of inappropriate humor.
Yeah,
sure. And obviously the situation that happened with Steve, then this is a point when your true friends come to the forefront, don't they? When you really, I've had situations as well in the past that have been challenging where real friends have stepped forwards. And how important has that been for you, Caroline, in that situation?
So for me, that's been the most critical point. So Steve went missing on the 12th of November 2018, and he was missing for a few days before he was found. And Emma had been the first person for me to tell that he was missing. The person I turned to every few hours to say, the police have said this is going on, that's happening. She basically moved in from that moment to help with the girls, who were 9 and 2 at the time. She was there when the police came to tell me what had happened, and was there ever since. And there were other friends around at the same time, but there wasn't that level of care from them, or commitment. I think the commitment to the ups and the downs and the good bits and the bad bits and the really, really shit bits, Emma, has just been fantastic for me, and recognizing that the girls need even more support than me.
Yeah. Was it for you, Emma? Is it more going into like an autopilot for you, or is this just part of your personality that you just felt like you needed to step forwards at that point?
I think there is an element of both those points, actually, because I think I remember thinking, and when it happened, and we talk about it, that when the police were at the door and they came in, and obviously we started to establish what had gone on, the words that I said, which you look back now and I went, it's okay, it'll be fine, which just seem superfluous, which is what do we mean it's going to be fine? But it was almost...
That's really not an appropriate thing to say.
Yeah,
she didn't think it was.
It was. Oh yes, your mother straight away. She went, "How can it ever be fine?" Yeah. And my mindset was immediately, okay, so what can we do? And actually, for other instances or things that have happened in my life, which effectively may be sort of perceived as trauma, it's like, that's my mindset. Okay, so what can I do? How can I make it better? And I think in some ways really helpful, we created a bit of a bubble for a couple of weeks, which is literally every telephone call, everything just taken care of. And I think that was my way of trying to cope with the enormity of the shock of experiencing this, to have a 2-year-old and in the kitchen and holding her and hearing Caroline crying in the other room and trying to make sense of that is like, it's huge. And then, helping Caroline to know what to say to her 9-year-old, and we're walking to school practicing the words. It's like, this is not something that you sort of prepare yourself for. So I naturally am a fixer. It's how I solve things. And I say initially it did create a bit of a bubble that meant that bubble had to break at some time. I had to go back to sort of work, living at home and otherwise. And that was quite tough, because obviously it was the new normal of, how can we help Caroline and the girls to find their way in this completely new world now? And every time you left, you have that sense of guilt, but then you have your own priorities and family or otherwise. So it's this sort of dimension balancing, of like,
and it must have been a balancing act.
A real sort of balancing act. And that, again, I know we spoke earlier in that it's all about communication. Everything is about that comes back to it. And trying to, instead of moving from fixing it to thinking actually being there sometimes is more than enough. I didn't have to have the answers in the early stages. I was trying to find the answers. Whereas now when I get, I'm smiling, when I get a random text message out of the blue saying, what did I do with Steve's toothbrush? And I'm looking at my phone going, not 100% sure. What I now do though is, okay, I wonder where this is coming from. What's come about? Is it that the girls have said something? Is Caroline, is it just a curiosity or otherwise? And I think that curiosity and understanding has helped Caroline, but also has helped me as well.
And I think just going back to what you were saying, Caroline, when I asked, the question about your sort of friendship and what you saw in each other. And again, I'm really wary of not going into stereotypes, but when sort of guys get together and have a friendship, and certainly that I've kind of discovered fairly late in life, is that the more open and honest you are, with somebody else, the deeper that connection is. And
Yeah.
again, sort of being general, I would say that women seem to be more vulnerable, better at doing that. So those bonds and those friendships form so much quicker and dare I say it, easier. Whereas men talking to each other, there tends to be a more protective of the self, and you don't want to give away too much of the inner, certainly the inner child that's there wanting to kind of put their head above the parapet and sort of say how you actually feel. So it all kind of comes back to, I think, sorry to interrupt, it's like when your friendship began and all of those things that were then sort of put into place right at the beginning that enabled you now to be where you are for each other, is this whole thing kind of comes back to the way that men feel about themselves and how they interact with each other. That, Emma, you were saying that you were able to listen and to hear what Caroline was saying, as opposed to offering solutions to what was happening right there and then. Men tend to be fixers. Again, I'm generalizing, but this is our tendency to fix. We want to offer solutions, whereas actually all that's required of us is to listen.
I think there's a time and a place for both those things. I completely agree that I think Emma's need to fix things has been really helpful, because there's not just the emotional side of things. There's a lot of practical stuff and
a lot of logistics, I can imagine.
Companies, organizations by them of Steve's death and all this stuff that required a mindset of somebody that just gets on with stuff. But equally, you need to step back from that mode and then pivot back into, now I need to just listen and be there. It's interesting that you talk about that stereotype that we try and avoid talking about, but it's there. And I'm going to put you on the spot now, which is something that I've never done before. And apologies if you find this uncomfortable. So when Steve was missing, on that first day, which was a Monday, I phoned round friends and family desperately trying to find him, and there was no sign of him. It was like he disappeared off the planet, and I reported him as a missing person. And I spoke to one of his friends who had been down the pub with him on the previous Saturday, just a normal afternoon down the pub. And he said, while we were down the pub, there was this strange moment where Steve randomly started talking about Gary Speed, the footballer that had killed himself several years before this. And there were a few of them, just like 3 or 4 friends, and nobody really thought to pursue this because Steve wasn't suicidal. He'd never mentioned it. He had no mental health issues. He wasn't suffering from depression or anything. So none of the guys at that point in time said, why are you saying that? They then started talking about the next curry night they'd go on or whatever. Would you have said something?
Personally, I probably, it depends the context of that situation, that relationship, but
I know hindsight's a beautiful thing. So
I probably wouldn't. I don't know if I would have caught on, because I just don't think you probably would have. He probably wouldn't have connected the dots, I don't think, at that point. And Gary Speed is quite, it was quite a shocking thing. People don't really understand the context. And I think, because I've read that part in your book as well, and it seems like a lot of people are a little bit blindsided by this. And some people do have depression and long-term mental illnesses, but there is also a lot of cases where that's not the case, is it, Caroline, in that sense? And people are a little bit in shock.
No notes, no nothing. So I've no idea. And when people ask about what were the signs, because that's an automatic question that everybody asks me, as far as I was concerned, there weren't any, apart from potentially that one thing that he said down the pub that people didn't respond to. And I have never ever held anyone accountable for not saying anything, because I don't think I would have done either. We can all go talking about Caroline Flack and people will say, they're not going to come to me and say, oh, you're going to take your own life because you've mentioned Caroline Flack.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to ever feel any sense of guilt whatsoever if they didn't pick up on something like that. But I do wonder whether that was the one little glimmer of a sign that we missed.
Yeah, I think reading your book, Caroline, what more struck me is some of the things around the pressures around potentially work, redundancies, working in an environment where it's toxic. Because in the last couple of years, I had a boss that I didn't get on with. That's the first time pretty much in my life that I've had a boss since playing football. And that dynamic was so toxic. I'm somebody that doesn't really suffer from anxiety, but I was waking up anxious at that point. I was thinking, you feel like your whole life is depending on somebody else's choices, and you have to show up. Sometimes you're not respected in the right way, and then you're feeling guilty because if you let this go, then you've got to look after your family. And I think it's sometimes something as simple as that can get out of control. Do you think so, James, in respect of those type of feelings?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about this before we went live, but certainly up until sort of fairly recently, I had suicidal ideation, and for me, it was mostly internal. There was no external things that I could particularly put my finger on to say that was the thing. It was more how I felt about myself generally. And it got to the point where I didn't feel I was of benefit to anybody. I didn't feel like I was of use to my wife, my children. I wasn't, making an impact, a dent. I had no sense of purpose, kind of direction, and it just felt pointless. And it was, a weird, troubling, frightening situation to be in, of feeling alone when you're in public, when you're with friends, when you're with family, of just feeling totally alone, and that nobody can get a sense of what you're thinking, how you're feeling. Very, very self-isolating.
It's a horrendous place to be, and it's a place where I imagine Steve spent some time too. I often it as a this dark tunnel that you end up traveling down, and you get to a point of no return. There are points along that tunnel that you could turn around if circumstances changed, but it gets narrower and narrower, and then there's no going back.
I totally agree.
And the mask is heavy, right, James? I think the mask for men is. It's probably similar for women in some ways as well, but there is a mask for men to not, show that vulnerability, or to be embarrassed, or there's a lot of shame and guilt around certain situations, and they can sort of withdraw and internalize a lot of that. Not everybody goes to the point of ending their own life, but I think people probably can resonate sitting in between those stages of thinking, there's times when I thought, I don't really care if I wake up in the morning, that type of thought, not to the point of ending it, but having those feelings of it could be easier to not be here. So I think there's that mask with people.
I think that there's definitely that sense of worthlessness that seems to come into the conversations I have frequently, which I struggle to understand, being on the other side of it, and I'm pretty sure Emma would as well, because we're both in situations where when Steve's here, he was a really hands-on dad. I wasn't a natural mum. I had postnatal depression with both my children, and Steve was a really natural dad, and our girls adored him, and he was irreplaceable. And there's a massive gap now, and that I've been able to close that gap with other bits and pieces. I've had no choice, but particularly at the time, that you can't replace somebody. And when you say you feel worthless, and Emma, you probably say the same about your family situation, wouldn't you?
And I think I do. And actually, what I was just thinking there, which is this is exactly why these types of conversations are so important, is to be able to talk about this without a mask, without being in the shadows, without sort of slightly dulcet tones of, oh, okay, we're going to be talking about suicide now, is that we need to talk much more openly. So, and that's across everybody, to get people having the conversation, to feel comfortable, but also something that I've really learned throughout it as well, which is trying to steer away from right and wrong. There isn't a right and a wrong. And it's a sensitive topic, which means that, we're likely to be a bit clumsy around it sometimes. And I might say something, or I'm learning something all the time. Caroline will share different things. And it's understanding that if we are picking people up on, actually, well, we can't talk about it, or you've got to feel this way or that way. No, let's just have some open conversations. Let's open up the communication to try and start to break down some of the stigma and taboo associated with it, which then means we might get a bit closer to understanding some of the stuff and the reasons why, which is a word I'd never come across before I met Caroline, was before Caroline with the situation, which was postvention. I'd never heard of it before, but it's if we talk about stuff here, we're more likely to have an understanding of what's going on from a prevention perspective as well.
Just to clarify what postvention is, it's the support that people receive after losing a loved one to suicide, and how we then deal with that aftermath, and how I think people don't realise that those who have been bereaved by suicide are now 65% more likely to take their own lives, and it creates a bit of a cycle because of the trauma that you go through. Intervention is absolutely necessary to support the people left behind, the generations of people left behind, so that we break that cycle. Whereas prevention is obviously trying to stop people taking their own lives in the first place. So there's that distinct difference, and there's a link between the two. And the work I do every day with my post and with my book, and now professionally with the work that I do around communication, is all about postvention, and all about the need to share our stories, however open and raw and messy and snotty and awful they might be. They're real, and I don't shy away from any of that stuff. I'm honest about every single part of it, and I think that is quite refreshing for a lot of people to hear. And I get men often saying, I was traveling down that dark tunnel, and having read the impact on your poor children, I realize I can't do that to my own children. It doesn't take away my problems, doesn't fix anything, but it means that I need to consider the people around me and the impact that this would have, and maybe that sense of worthlessness is not well founded based on the fallout I see from your family.
I mean, I'd assume, Caroline, and I can only again go, and we can all only go on our own lived experience, but I mean, I can only assume that if you were to, because I was only thinking about it, I was considering it, I hadn't thought about how I'd do it or anything like that, but I can imagine that if you're going to do it and you do it successfully, that none of that can come into your mind, because I'm sure at that moment in time, if it had done, then it would have prevented you. That this sequence of events, this domino effect of making the decision that that's what you were going to do and then going through with it, that none of that can have come into the consciousness. Because for me, that was the thing that brought me back, was thinking about my children. And, I can't imagine that to actually go through with it, that would have been part of that, cognitive process that had it have been, that it would have prevented. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but
I can see how painful it is for you to talk about, and I appreciate you being so open and honest, and this is exactly what we need. And I can't imagine how many cases there have been of people in a situation like yours where you've got that close and not done it. We hear about the people that have done it, but yeah, I try sometimes, or I used to try and process this with my logical mind. And we don't talk about method, but the method that Steve used required some really full-on commitment to go through with it. And there are moments, seconds along that way that I think at that point, doesn't the desire to live kick in? However determined you might be, there must be some desire to live and to just breathe. But no, there wasn't. And that can't be something you can do with a logical mind. So there's no point in trying to put yourself in those shoes with a logical mind. It's getting to people before we hit that stage. And it's knowing how we deal with that, and making these spaces available for people to open up and to talk and to share and to say. I think people sometimes get scared of saying to somebody else, are you feeling suicidal? Are you thinking about taking your own life? And you think if I say that and I put the idea in their head, they might go off and do it. That's not. What it does do is give somebody the opportunity to say, yes, I am feeling really shit and I need help and I'm rock bottom. It's not going to work every time because they might not be honest about that, but it's never ever going to make somebody go and do it. So it's having these moments where we're just open and honest and direct, and we don't shy away from being clear about how we're feeling, but also asking other people how they're feeling too, and checking in a much deeper, less surface level way.
Do you think sort of societally we're struggling? We've got a comment.
There was a little stigma and discrimination is still rife towards mental health, in my view. It was from Debbie on there. Thanks, Debbie. I agree, but like we said with Steve, there wasn't this prehistory of what we would consider, mental health problems, was there? And I've heard this, like we've said, many a time, and this mental health seems to be only encompassing people who have been on sort of antidepressant meds for a long time, or anxiety pills. But it's everybody's got a mental health, haven't they, in terms of their experience and how they feel on an ongoing basis. You don't have to be diagnosed or labeled something. So that's really, when it came to your book, Caroline, I don't know if it's because, I wouldn't say it's because I'm a man, but I wanted to sort of understand the context of the why, probably, and that's probably been one of the hardest things for you. Is that the question most people come to you with? Is what was it? What built up to this position where Steve would feel like this? Was there anything that you thought could have been a culminative trigger of events that could have spiraled? Because I know with James and we've both got things like sexual abuse in our past families from childhood, and these are things that a lot of men don't talk about, and they are really hidden down, and even their wives don't know about it. I'm not saying this is at all anything to do with Steve, but it's just, was there anything there, Caroline, in terms of that cumulative effects that you think could have pushed Steve in that certain direction?
Yeah, there's a catalogue of stuff actually that I know about. Because I was there. So after we got married, we went and travelled the world, and on our honeymoon, I fell off a balcony and broke my spine, which I think traumatized Steve from day one, and he had to look after me for the next couple of years until I could walk again. That wasn't how he planned to spend his honeymoon, or anyone would plan to spend their honeymoon, unfortunately. My intention was to get pregnant, come back with a glowing tummy and start our life with young children, but I came back in a wheelchair instead, and the half of our trip around the world was cancelled. And then after that, his dad died from a brain tumour. Then his mum, a year later, was hit by a car and died in the road, and he had to identify her body. And then the year after that, my dad died from lung cancer. During that time, we had two children who were both ill and really kind of weedy little babies, and in and out of hospital all the time with one thing or another. And we were absolutely battered. and we'd had enough of life generally. But
Mm.
then it started to get better. So any one of those things could have fed into his mindset, and in fact, I think it was probably all of those things and plenty of things I didn't know about as well.
Yeah.
It's clear that there's no one thing that will make somebody take their own life. It is a combination of all sorts of things. Sometimes we know about them, and sometimes people have talked about them many times and attempted many times, and it doesn't come as a shock, sadly. And then other times they've not talked about them and suddenly they're gone. And that is quite shocking.
And the work situation as well, I read in the book as well, there was maybe a toxic work environment and those type of things, wasn't there, at that time as well?
Absolutely. He worked for an agency, and he spent quite a chunk of time with a client who, I mean, they were just arseholes. They were the nastiest people on the planet. And they treated these agency staff and some of their own staff really badly, and they'd chuck stuff at them and spit at them and just demean them every day. And that ground him down to the point where I said, you need to get shifted away from this client and get onto a better project, which eventually he did. But he said time and time again, I can't say anything. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to lose my job again. I face being made redundant again. But the damage was done by the time they moved him.
And you can see that, Emma, I think that goes back to our early conversation about autopilot, because as a man, you know, I've been through things like divorce, sort of splitting my family apart because of a child sexual abuse thing in the family. So I know during those times I went into autopilot, and it's not, probably Caroline will resonate with this, it's not till the dust settles that, you know, the pain really does sometimes can set in at that point. Do you think that, Emma, on those type of things, in terms of being on this autopilot and thinking people are not okay, they're just in survival mode, and you sort of have to be careful of that?
Yeah, I think you are. I think there's I think the survival mode and the doing things, I think you're right. It was just a shock. It's like none of us had ever, you talk about so much and you expect, and you have dreams, or even you think about, you know, bad stuff that might happen. This just was nothing that was ever on the agenda. So you've got that initial shock. I think sometimes, and certainly for myself, the autopilot and survival and fixing is that helps me feel that I'm supporting in this situation. So actually it almost helped me to keep some momentum without, let's also just completely put on the table, when somebody dies, there is so much paperwork. When somebody dies through suicide, there's so much additional thought and complexity, and not just that, but the sensitivity around it, with every single telephone call explanation, challenging with life insurances or not paying out, all these different things going on as well. So actually there's an element of, I had a role, and it was a really important role as well. There were, and even sometimes now, because I am naturally a fixer, sometimes Caroline will even prefix to say, I'm telling you this not because I want you to fix it, Emma. And I'm like, okay. And that's not just Caroline, that's other friends and family as well, because I am somebody that people will come to. So it helped naturally. But I think also what it meant is, as I said, and I talked about this bubble for a couple of weeks, it was a bit like not really appreciating the enormity, because I was there to almost give a protective layer. And that's not sustainable. So then it's about finding sustainable support. So you have a lot of people up front saying, I'll always be here for you. And I heard it of people saying it to Caroline time and time again. I've had people say it sort of to myself over situations. And then what happens is a little bit of time, and then Christmas came and went, and then it goes very quiet. And that quiet was absolutely deafening for Caroline, but also for me, because I was thinking, oh my gosh, like, I said that I would always be there for the girls, and I'm committed to that. And other people had said it and they weren't. And I think it's about being really careful that, particularly when somebody you've lost through suicide, trust is evaporated. And so actually what I recognized quite early on, and I still very much with the girls, is if you say you're going to do something, you either do it, and if you can't do it, that's fine, but explain, communicate. And I sort of come back to it, but it is all about communication. And I think we've got a lot that we can learn personally, that also we can learn in the workplace about that consistent, reliable, dependable communication as well.
Yeah.
And we got
Emma,
Danny
can I
on
just
here. Sorry,
quickly ask
James. We
you-
just got Danny quickly. Totally appreciate this whole conversation. Your openness is so refreshing. I know lots of people who have attempted to take their own life, and quite a lot who have gone through with it. What really resonates with me is the issue of shame, a feeling of total worthlessness, which I would guess underlies much of the thinking of those who successfully take their own lives. Thank you, Danny. Appreciate that. So
thanks, Danny. Thanks, Danny.
I can, resonate with that 100%.
Sorry. I was just saying, Emma, what did you do for yourself in terms of protecting your own emotions around this? Because you were clearly sort of giving a lot of yourself, but what did you do in terms of self-protection or creating some way in which you could make sense of how you were feeling around this? I mean, obviously, there was a lot of emphasis on how Caroline was feeling and her trauma going through it, but what about yours? What did you do for yourself?
I think it's probably a quite interesting sort of perspective as well. Because of my work and what I do, I guess I'm also very fortunate in that developing resilience is something that I talk about and support with people. So being able to pick up and again, even Caroline and I, because of the amount of reading we do, the conversations we have, it was trying to tap into these different sort of things to be able to, again, it's talking openly about it. So actually, sometimes I got much better at saying, I don't know what to say here, or actually, I'm sort of in this situation here. I don't know what to do. And I think Caroline also was really learning and understanding. It's like, I'm sorry, I've got to go. And there's that sort of this tension, which is we both know and understand both elements, but you're again thrown in this situation. And I think that there's no rule book. There's nothing in there that no one, you can have guidelines, or you can have even Daddy Blackbird is great, closest you're going to probably get to some sort of an outline of things we can do. But actually, it was finding your way. And I talk about it every day with the work that I do as well, but it's finding our humanness. And I think if you really go to your humanness, kindness, care, then you're more likely to start to think about, right, what's right for me, what's right for Caroline, what's right for the girls, and chipping away at it like that. And I think there's no massive revelation or one standalone gesture. Not at all. There was some really, really horrible times. There's times when I felt like, and I think Caroline put in the book as well, that I felt like guilt and like worry I wasn't getting it right. There's other times I thought, gosh, now I am helping and it's good. And that's us just being able to talk about it in a more open way to try and find out what works. And also one thing, it changes by the hour. And when I mean that by the hour, in the early days, it really does. But even nowadays, because there are so many triggers out there, we can be thinking, right, things are a little more settled and that something is magnified because of the trauma associated with it, which means then it's the pivoting sort of quite quickly as well.
I can give you a great example of that. Was when Ada was a bit younger, and she'd say things completely out of the blue. She was 2 at the time. As she got a bit older, there was probably many moments that would have shocked the life out of me. And I'm immediately ringing Emma. And there was one time when she said to me, I know what I want for my birthday. And I thought, oh, thank God, because kids are difficult, aren't they? And I said, oh, what's that, darling? She said, I want Daddy back. And I thought, fuck. And I'm on the phone to Emma straight away saying, what do I do? What do I say? And while I'm sobbing on the phone to Emma, Ada bursts back into the room and says, no, stop. I changed my mind. I want a unicorn. And suddenly it's not an issue anymore. And Emma's on red alert and I'm panicking, and I spend the rest of the day crying because I can't get over the fact that she said that. And like at Easter, if Jesus can come back to life, why can't Daddy? And all this sort of stuff. But then 5 minutes later, she's gone off playing a game with something. And it's literally that minute by minute roller coaster of emotion. There is no grief cycle or curve or gentle little river that you can drift along. It's a shit splat of emotions and different things that happen and different people getting involved or not getting involved. And there's no right or wrong. There's just one day at a time, and sometimes 1 minute at a time, to just keep moving through it. And reading books, like Emma once introduced me to Emotional Agility by Susan David, and even the phrase is just, we have to be much more flexible with our emotions. We can't think, right, today I'm sad and I'm pissed off and that's it, because you can't just live a day like that. And equally, you can't be thinking, this is a good day today, I'm going to be fine. You're going to go through all sorts throughout the day. And that doesn't relate just kind of grieving after loss by suicide. It relates to life.
I think that point is really important. You just made me think, given that I haven't even mentioned a quote so far, but there is a quote by Albert Seibert, which is, resiliency isn't something you have, it's something you do. And I think that's really important, not just for this situation, but broader as well, which is, it's what are we doing every day to top up that level of resiliency to then help us through whatever we're going through.
100%. And Steve Phillip here. So yeah, you know Steve, Carolyn, right?
I do know Steve.
So Steve's a great guy from the Jordan legacy. Tragically, Steve's son passed from suicide as well. And we said we'll definitely have Steve on in the future. So he said, thank you, John and James, for opening up this important conversation. And please say hi to Caroline from me. It's also lovely to see and hear from Emma, who I feel I know through Caroline's book, Daddy Blackbird. Yeah, it was a fantastic book.
There is a I got to hug Steve last week at the Suicide and Co Summit. It was amazing. You know, when you talk to somebody online for so long, and then eventually you see them in real life, and they do actually look like the person in the LinkedIn photo. And he did, and it was brilliant. But yeah,
so John and I haven't actually met in person yet. So when I get to see him, he's gonna be hugged.
They say never meet your heroes, don't they?
I don't know if I'm going to be disappointed or not, but he's...
Oh, he's back.
So Steve said, I've heard the term successful used a couple of times in relation to a suicide attempt or death by suicide. Language around suicide is important and can, of course, be triggering. The term successful is perhaps one to think about. Do you want to frame a death by suicide as something we've been successful at accomplishing? This is something pretty important from Steve, because